In this video I'm going to demonstrate how to get a model out of 3ds Max and into Unreal. The first thing we'll need is to make a model in 3ds Max, and in this case we're going to make a teapot. So I'm in 3ds Max. I'm going to go up and make a teapot. So I'm going to click on the teapot button. I'm going to click and drag to create a teapot. And one of the important things that I would like to draw your attention to at this early stage is that on screen we have an axis, 3 axes, because we're in 3D space. So we have an X, a Y and a Z axis, and these are color coded: red, green and blue. So red is X, green is Y, Z is blue. And you can see that the teapot spout is facing down the x-axis. We call this positive x because that's where all the positive values of x go. And then we would call this negative x because that's where all the negative values of x go. And we can see that z is up. Z represents going up and down in space. So we have this model, and what we're going to do is we're going to export it, and then we're going to import it into Unreal, and we're going to see what happens to the model. The other thing that we can see, that the radius of this teapot is, I'm going to set it to 40. We want to make sure that the teapot is what we call on the origin, which is that this point, which is kind of like the data point for the teapot. If you ask where is the teapot, this is the point that you're discussing. You're not discussing the end of the spout or where the handle is. You're discussing this arbitrary point here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the select and move key, and I'm going to right click on these arrows to set the value to 0. So I know that this teapot is at 0, 0, 0. Okay, so we have a teapot that apparently has a radius of about 40, and then we know that it's situated on the origin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this. So I'm going to go File, Export. I'm going to export everything in the scene. And you can see that I'm already directed to the export folder, and I'm going to call this teapot. This is the dialog to export the teapot. So there are a couple of settings that we want to make sure we have. We want to make sure that smoothing groups is ticked. We want to make sure that tangents and binormals is ticked. Turbo smooth doesn't really matter, but it doesn't do any harm if you leave it on. And that is the most important one. That if that gets left off, it can cause all kinds of problems. So we're not going to worry about animation yet. We're not going to worry about cameras or lights or any of the embedded media. And we are just going to have a quick look at units. And we can see that this is automatic. This is grayed out at the moment because we're on automatic, and we have a scale factor of 1, which means that when it gets exported, there's going to be no changes made to the file. So the scale factor will still be 1. We'll still have a 40 unit teapot. Okay, so I've exported the file. And then, just as a curiosity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure how tall this teapot is, and I'm going to cheat and make a box to measure how tall it is. And you can see that as I bring this up, I'm just checking, and the teapot is about 62 units high. Okay, so I've opened up Unreal now, and we are basically in the project browser, and what I'm going to do is show you how you should open up a completely new product. So I'm going to go to new project categories, and I'm going to select games, and I'm going to go to next. And typically we will only be dealing in blueprint projects and completely blank projects. So I'm going to open up the blank project. I'm going to make sure that I'm in Blueprint. Maximum quality, ray tracing is going to be disabled. No starter content because I don't need any extra junk in there, and we're having it for desktop and console. So I have already got a prescribed kind of area which Unreal loads into, which is on my F drive, and I'm going to call this CA test, and I'm going to create this project, and Unreal will go away and do some maths. And here is the kind of default blank Unreal project. Down here we have basically a way of splitting this panel into a kind of directory structure in the content. And if we go into the content folder, we will see that there is nothing in here. And what is currently going on is that Unreal is hiding all of the technical infrastructure from us. And that's usually the way that you want to work. So this is pretty good. So what I'm going to do is, just as a good piece of practice, I'm going to create a new folder. So I'm going to add a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder mesh, because we call the models meshes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to import into this folder that file that we have already made. So I'm going to import documents, Max 2020 export, and there's my teapot, and I'm going to open that up. And you'll see this dialog a lot in the future. So we can see that you can add translation and rotations and change the scale of the imported object. You tend not to want to do this. There's options for generating collision and indicating that it's a skeletal mesh. We're not going to worry about that for the moment. And there's options for forcing different axes, identifying materials, and then the information about the FBX file. In general, you just need to leave this alone, and we're just going to click import. Import all will import groups or whole batches of files, but we just have the one file. We're just going to go with import. And you can see that down here we have a model of the teapot. And if I click on this, you can see that we have the teapot. And again, what we have here is the model of the teapot, and we have the X, Y, and Z axes, as we did in 3ds Max. But you will note one important change between what Unreal does and 3ds Max does. You can see that the X-axis is positive along the spout, and you can see that the Z-axis is positive up. But note that the Y direction appears to be going in the opposite direction. In other words, when we look at the teapot with the spout on the right, positive Y is coming towards us. If we look in 3ds Max, with the spout on our right, we can see that positive Y is going away from us. So between these two packages, there is what we call a Y flip. In other words, the Y direction is flipped. Right. If you're using other game engines or other 3D packages, you need to be careful about the orientation of this 3D space, these axes, because they are not defined. In other words, different software uses different notation. Okay, so we have the model loaded. We can drag and drop the model into the scene. And what we will do is we will just see things like we can see the location, and if I click this little arrow it will reset our teapot. I'm just going to move the floor out of the way for the moment so that we can see the complete teapot. So we know that the teapot is at the origin. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to alt click so that I can have another teapot on top, and we can see that I have put this teapot at about 60 units up, and you can see that this is around about the top of this teapot. And I'm just going to turn the snap off so that we can see that if I plop this second teapot, it's going to be approximately 62. So the important thing is that we know that the units, I can get rid of that teapot, we know that the units have been preserved. We know roughly the bounds of this teapot, we know roughly the size of this teapot, we know that the scale has been preserved, and that the unit sizes, that they were generic units in 3ds Max, and the generic units in Unreal are the same. And that's what that scale factor does. The other important thing is to know that these scale units, even though the units themselves are the same, they're actually different measured units. So in 3ds Max, the units normally refer to inches, and in Unreal, the units usually refer to centimeters. And being clear about the units is very important in Unreal, because when it comes to lighting, the physical distances are key, because lighting changes over distance. So does certain aspects of camera, like depth of field. So it is quite important that we make sure that we understand the units that Unreal uses.